Hi everyone, this is the Q&A portion to the talk that I gave on unit testing to the Salt Lake.net users group. If you have any questions of your own regarding the talk, please feel free to leave them down in the comments and I will try to get to them as soon as I can. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks. With that, I think I want to open it up for questions, comments, anything people have, anything I missed, what I should go back and look at. I know previously when I did this before, I've seen people ask questions about extension methods and how to go through and test those. In general, things like extension methods should be pure methods, meaning that they shouldn't mutate state. They should take in a value and return another value, just like how the system link methods work, because it gives you that level of testability. And ultimately you shouldn't worry about necessarily needing to abstract those away inside of your tests. So just be aware with that. You do end up testing them just like static methods. So let's see.
Looks like we do have one question in the chat, but I think at this point, if people want to unmute them and ask, you can always do that too.
Yeah, certainly. So the question is, on numerous personal projects, my biggest struggle is inventing meaningful tests. Can you explain your thought process on how you think up a good test? So I would say my first comment would be is not necessarily to try to think up a good test, and mostly to go through and look at the system under test. So I'm going to jump back to my CSV parser. And in general, there's sort of a bit of a debate, right? Like, should I have written tests over this constructor that validate that this constructor has a condition that says, is this dependency null or not, right? Should I write those tests? And ultimately, the end goal is to make sure that when you run your test suite, you should have a high degree of confidence that the code being tested is accurate. If your test suite is not giving you that confidence, I would invite you to go back and revisit it and ask yourself what tests would give you that level of confidence, because ultimately that's what you're looking to do, is you want to catch issues before they get further downstream. As far as going through and coming up with the actual test, generally, I would say I try to look through the public API. I do not encourage people to test things that aren't effectively public, right? I'm not testing parse lines directly, right? I'm only ever calling parse. And look for effectively the conditions, right? And write tests to try and cover each of those conditions. Now, some of the conditions may not be reachable, right? It is very common to write tests that, or I should say, it's very common to see code that maybe catches an exception that you know can occur, but maybe it's not easy to replicate that condition inside of a testing case. But no, you really need to leave that catch block in there. So again, people get really hung up on like test coverage numbers. I think test coverage is a good way of finding what you still need to test, but just because something's covered by a test doesn't mean that it's actually tested, right? Test coverage numbers can find what you've missed, but not what you've actually written a good test for. So effectively looking through the common cases, and I would say too, if you find that you're writing a test and questioning the value of it, delete the test. Like some people get weird about that, of like, no, we should leave this. No, delete it. If you don't know if the test is adding value and you can't say what value that test is adding, get rid of it. It's not going to be doing you a lot of good. Because again, you're trying to boost that confidence level. So I think that's probably where I would steer. Let's see. So from Eric, what do you do for live streams? What is your Twitch handle? And I get to post memes on your Twitch chat. So I will drop. So you'll note there's a pattern to those. Oh, I sent those privately to William. Sorry, Will. Let's try this one more time.
That's fine. I'll put them in for you.
Okay. So
keep going.
So there are links out there if people are interested in doing live streams. I try to stream Thursday nights, which is actually tonight. Usually I start about 9 p.m. Pacific. till about 11 p.m. Pacific, which I am very conscious of is about the worst possible time for the vast majority of the people on the globe. It's the waking hours for that time frame is fairly small. So I do actually post the recordings out to YouTube as well. So I'm sure people are starting to notice a pattern in the links. So if people want to do it, I primarily do a lot of stuff around WPF, my material design and XAML project, which is one of the most popular WPF theming libraries to bring Google material design. But recently I've done a lot of stuff around automated UI testing. I've done stuff with the system command line. When I can con my coworkers into pairing with me, I really love it to have a pair on there. That way I'm not just talking to myself on the stream, because that's always exciting when I realize that I've been talking to myself for a while. Perfect. Any other questions? Comments, concerns? I do want to thank you guys for inviting me to have me on here. It's been great. I always enjoy getting a chance to go and talk and share, and writing good tests is definitely one that I like. Let's see. Oh, I missed a question. So from Gary, can you maybe talk a little bit more about what kinds of behavior or return values you found where setup returns chain in mock or AutoMock were insufficient to simulate real-world behavior and dependencies? Yeah, so I believe that's, let's go back up. I think it's sample 5 that has those in here. So effectively, or even we'll go back to 4 where it's a little more obvious, right? We're going through, and when is this insufficient, right? And so a couple samples I would point to. So unfortunately, closed source project, so I can't necessarily share the source code, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily insufficient, right? The mock libraries are set up to give you a lot of control and intercept any of the invocations onto the dependency. So there's plenty of APIs to be able to do it. So I wouldn't say that they're somehow deficient in their ability to be able to effectively hijack calls and do stuff with it, even to the point of throwing exceptions, right? There's a .throws onto the end of this guy as well that you can go through and have it throw out an exception as well. Kick that back. So I wouldn't say that they're necessarily lacking in any way, but what I would say is that they're very fixed to a single point in time, right? So usually when I switch from a mock over to a simulator, it's because there's some commonality in this behavior that I'm doing with my setup and return that I want to share across multiple tests, right? So I think that's where I would say the kicker is the moment I need this same logic used in more than one place, I probably am going to stop using the mock and going straight for the simulator. Now, I'll say this too. Mocks aren't bad, and I still use mocks in my unit testing, right? Especially for the case where I have a dependency, I need it to behave this specific way for this specific test, right? It is much easier to use a mock to force it into that one specific case than it is to go and add in all the logic into a simulator. That's not really a great usage of the simulator if there's a specific use case that I'm trying to test, right? So in those cases, I will use mocks as well. And again, that's why I like to leverage my AutoMocker library, simply because it gives me an easy way of swapping between, do I want a mock implementation for this dependency, or do I just want a regular mock? And I realize regular mock gets confusing when the library is called mock and the class name is called mock, just to make things interesting. So if that helps. So again, I wouldn't say they're deficient, but they don't allow me to very realistically share this behavior or have any confidence that this behavior matches my actual implementation. So I'd say those are the two drawbacks. But again, if what I need to do is make something behave one specific way, that is pretty much the use case that they're designed to solve. Any other questions? Did I
Okay.
miss anything else?
Yeah, we'll give a chance for folks to ask any other questions.
Perfect. Yeah, this is definitely one of those areas where I'm very passionate about it and have really enjoyed going through and learning the unit testing. I will admit, when I was first shown the simulator pattern, I think it took me a good 6 months before I finally decided, okay, yes, this is better. It took a while, and it took several bug reports to finally convince me that, oh, right, it's especially as I started seeing those bug reports roll in and look at the code and realize, oh, right, that's failing because I set up my mock to behave like X, and the real implementation evolved over time, and now it doesn't behave like that anymore. My test was now giving a worst case scenario, false positive, when it should have failed and it didn't. Worst possible case you can have, right? Gave me all this confidence that my code was working just fine. You ship and realize, oh wait, my test was not actually testing the real thing, right? And a lot of times this is why people will push away from unit tests and push towards like integration or end-to-end tests, is because then you actually exercise your real implementation. You get to see that real thing working, right? But it doesn't actually. But those types of tests are slow, and they tend to be a lot more brittle. So in my mind, the simulator gets you as close to that as possible. And please don't hear me say that you shouldn't have UI tests or end-to-end tests or manual testing. Definitely, all tests have things that they're going to catch that the other forms of tests don't, but they all have their blind spots, and it's important to know where those blind spots are and not be overly reliant on just one. You need a coverage, right? Are there any websites that you have found with more examples of the simulator pattern for further learning and research? So the unfortunate part is if you Google for the port adapter simulator pattern, you are going to find almost no samples for them. It was proposed by a Microsoft employee many years ago, and there were some old MSDN articles. I want to say his name was Eric, and he actually has similar write-ups with samples. But if you're looking to actually see practical applications of it, nope, that is the wrong window. That's the window I'm wanting. So, and I will drop this link in chat. This was the Microsoft command line library that I'd mentioned before, where you can actually go through and see samples of the simulator pattern. So actually, John conveniently made the last commit here. Was the engineer that actually initially introduced me to the topic. So I would say if you're looking for a practical example of following this, you can also find lots of write-ups on the port adapter simulator pattern, just sort of generically, that's not necessarily directly tied or applied to unit testing. So the pattern itself is fairly well known. Usually it gets applied at more of an architectural level to like infrastructure and that kind of thing, and not always directly as a solution to code.
Okay, Kevin, we did get some questions from YouTube.
Okay,
So let me ask you those.
fire away.
Are you aware of / can you recommend libraries that will create much of the boilerplate for creating unit tests and unit test projects for SUT classes and methods? Preferably a library that works with Visual Studio Code as opposed to create unit tests, which is a feature of Visual Studio Enterprise, which is too pricey for individual developers.
Yeah. So my answer is probably going to be not what people want to hear, and so I have yet to find any of those libraries that I would actually recommend, including the built-in Visual Studio one. Ultimately, what those libraries end up doing is giving you they typically go through your code and look for branch conditions and try to generate a test stub, more or less, for each of the various branch conditions, which is an okay start, but can sometimes be misleading. They rarely will generate you a full unit test. Sometimes, like usually, you'll get your project and your unit test itself, and some sort of an arrange ish because it's really hard for them to detect how to hit that branch, and then some invocation of the thing that they're actually testing, right? So I don't know if I would necessarily suggest using them, because ultimately testing for a 100% branch coverage, though having good coverage is great. I feel like people use that as a mark or goal of, we need to achieve 75% coverage, right? And that's not a good goal, because ultimately the quality comes from what you write in this test and how you wrote your objects, not necessarily in the quantity that you wrote. I would rather see people focus on how they can remove code from their stuff and get rid of redundancy rather than doing it. So unfortunately, I don't think I have a good answer for a recommendation for a library or framework for that. Were there any other questions on the YouTube side of things?
I think that's it.
Okay. Perfect.
All right.
I want to thank you guys for having me on. It's been great. I have fun. I enjoy doing it.
It was good. I think you did great. Thank you.
I did have one question for you guys. Am I allowed to fill out my own survey? It seems wrong if I'm allowed to rate myself.
Go ahead and rate yourself, but that makes you eligible for a prize, so I think you should.
Oh, excellent. Now the question is, how well do I think I did?
Okay.
Thank you, Charles.
Good question. If you can stop sharing your screen,
Sir,
I'll go back to sharing mine,
all yours.
and we'll get to the prizes. Okay. Before the prizes, we are going to mention our next meetup event. Second Thursday of July, July 9th, 5:30 again. We're going to have Thomas Camargo present on migrating existing applications to .NET Core. That is an exciting topic that I think lots of people will have an interest in.
Cool.
So-
And I'm going to end the live stream right now, so it won't be on YouTube anymore. They don't have to watch everybody else get prizes. It's